back to the Online Marriage Challenge. Today we're going to talk about how to keep our marriage in the safe zone. And we're going to use a simple analogy that we can all relate to, and that is when we're out on the road, driving, we have these things in place to keep our car in the safe zone, and they're called guardrails.
That's right. You know, when we leave our house in the morning, we never have a goal of putting our car in a ditch, do we? But you know, there's times where it's a little dark outside, maybe it's a little foggy, we might come up on an unexpected turn, you know, and if there's not a guardrail in place, you know, there's a chance we could put our car in a ditch. When it comes to our marriage, you know, there's a chance we can put our marriage in a ditch as well. You know, there's going to be some unexpected turns when it comes to your marriage, maybe even a little bit of fog at times. And if we don't pre-position a guardrail in an unsafe zone, then we could also put our marriage in a ditch. And we could even total a marriage beyond repair. So today, we're going to talk about what guardrails are, what it means to have guardrails in your marriage. We're going to share some personal examples of guardrails that Mindy and I have put in place, and then we're going to leave you with a challenge.
All right, so what is a guardrail? A guardrail is simply an indication that if you go any further, there could be damage. I mean, imagine driving down the road without any guardrails. Imagine driving through the mountains alongside a cliff and there's no guardrails. What kind of emotions would that create within you? I'm guessing we'd be pretty fearful. We'd be worried. We'd be nervous. We'd be tense. We'd have some anxiety. Now let's translate that into the marriage realm. You know, imagine a marriage with no moral standards, with no guardrails. What kind of emotions would you have on a daily basis about your marriage? You know, are we headed for the ditch? We really don't know. What path are we on? Because we don't have guardrails showing us the safe zone and the danger zone.
Now, at first, you might think that guardrails, you know, sound like rules or restrictions, and you know, it's like, you know, how do I keep my spouse in check? But that's not it at all. In fact, guardrails are actually a benefit for our marriage. So how do they benefit our marriage? One, when you have guardrails in place, you have moral standards in place, it increases safety in our marriage, increases trust, freedom, peace of mind, increases our confidence.
Yeah, and I would even venture to say it increases our intimacy levels. Because when you have all things working together and you don't have the distraction of the anxiety or the fear or the jealousy, you can have a lot more intimate moments or a lot more intense intimacy. When you
Absolutely.
Don't have
and when we have a high moral standard in our marriage, that means we're making a conscious decision to do those things that are right and backing ourselves away from the ditch in a healthy way and putting those guardrails in place. And for me, it just increases our confidence. And so going back to your analogy with driving through the mountains, think about if you know for sure that those guardrails are in place on the mountains and that they're going to protect you from going off the cliff or going into an unsafe zone. In that worst case scenario, you might bump up against the guardrail, get a few scratches on your fender, but overall everything's going to be okay. You're very confident when you're driving. In fact, you're probably sitting back in your car, weaving in and out of the hills, going 80 miles an hour.
Wind's blowing through.
Absolutely, you know, you're enjoying the drive, you're enjoying the ride because you know it's safe and it's healthy for your marriage. So now we're going to talk about how we can apply guardrails into our marriage, and Mindy and I are going to share some specific examples of guardrails that we put in place to keep our marriage in the safe zone.
All right, let's get real and apply some of this information. A few examples of guardrails that Justin and I have set in our marriage. Let's start with communicating. Whether it's through email, text messaging, social media, we don't do any private messaging between us and someone of the opposite sex. So say we bump up against that guardrail, I receive a message from someone of the opposite sex. All I do at that point is make sure that Justin knows about it. So that's the important part. We just stay open and honest about that. And an example of this is at one point in work, I exchanged phone numbers with somebody of the opposite sex. So I recognized I bumped up against a guardrail, and now I have to fix this. So the first thing I do is communicate to Justin. Hey, want to let you know, I gave my coworker my number. Probably should have gave him yours, but I wasn't thinking. So he just wants to invite us to a dinner party. So how I correct that is the next time I see that person, I say, hey, let me give you my spouse's number. Here's Justin's number. Any details about the dinner, just go ahead and send them to him. We'll make sure we're there.
Absolutely. And when it comes to work relationships, this is an area where we really do have to set up some guardrails because for most of us, you know, we might spend 40, 50 hours a week in the workplace, and there's a lot of opportunities to fail and to end up in a ditch into the danger zone if we don't put in some healthy guardrails. So for me, some of the standards that I have is one, is I don't share an office space or close quarters with someone of the opposite sex. Also, I don't you know, go to a lunch appointment or go to any private meeting one-on-one with someone of the opposite sex. And lastly, I don't ride in a car with someone of the opposite sex by myself. And so, these might sound a little bit extreme. Are these really a big deal to ride in a car with someone or to go to lunch with someone? I mean, what if it's an important client? I mean, how do you handle that kind of stuff? And sharing office space, isn't that almost impossible to avoid? Well, let me just give you some examples of real life things that have happened, in our relationship and how I handle them. The first one was early on in our marriage, I had an opportunity to kind of get upgraded into a different office suite, but what it required is that I was going to share an office with another woman who was about my age. And so because I had that guardrail in place that I don't share an office space or close quarters with someone of the opposite sex, I had to go to my boss and say, hey, I really appreciate the opportunity, but I can't take that office because, I have a standard in my marriage that I don't share an office space. I can't spend 8 hours a day with another woman communicating in close quarters and not accidentally slip into the danger zone. And so I had to decline that opportunity. The second one was, how do you not go to lunch with a client, if it's a female? Well, I just have a practice that if I'm going to a lunch meeting or a dinner appointment or a private meeting, I just always invite a coworker, and I just let them say, hey, I'm bringing such and such along because they have some expertise in this area, or hey, I'm bringing him along as a training opportunity, and it's always appropriate. I just always announce the purpose of me bringing someone along. Mm-hmm. And thirdly, I don't ever engage in riding a car with someone. And sometimes this is tough to avoid because there's times where you carpool to a meeting or you're doing traveling and your company requires you that you carpool. And so what I've always done is to ensure that there's multiple people in the car or there's someone else of the same sex in there with me so that's not uncomfortable. And at times this has been difficult to juggle. We were all traveling out to Indianapolis one time for a work assignment. And as we were coming back, some of the folks in the car had asked, can we drop them off at their house instead of going back to our workplace? And when I started thinking about the order in which we were going to drop people off, it was actually going to put me dropping off a female last. So I'd be in the car by myself with a female. So actually, at a gas station, I pulled my coworker aside and said, hey, buddy, I know it would make sense to drop you off first, but I had this standard in my marriage that I can't ride in a car with a woman by myself. I just don't ever put myself in a position to fail or to be dangerous in our marriage. So I know it's out of the way, man, but do you mind if I drop off her first and then we'll swing back and drop you off? And you know what? He understood it, he appreciated it, and also showed him that these are the guardrails in my marriage. And we just have to do that.
Yeah, and I know this, that does a lot of great things. It inspires other people. Like, well, that's different. And they may at first, joke around or nudge you like, oh, he's whipped, whatever. But the other thing that it does is think about the opposite emotions. Remember the emotions we talked about a marriage with no guardrails. Mm-hmm. Now let's talk about those opposite emotions that I've now felt because he has those solid guardrails and he's proven them in the toughest circumstances, that he's willing to stand for his marriage. So at that point, our intimacy is stronger, my trust is stronger, my confidence in our marriage is stronger. I know that we're still in a safe zone.
So we talked about how you can put healthy guardrails in place to keep you safe, to keep your marriage from going in the ditch. Well, even as you're driving down the road, before you get to the guardrail, before you bump up against it, there's that warning sign. There's that rumble strip that lets you know that you're drifting off towards a guardrail. So when it comes to our marriage, there's also some red flags. There's some warning signs that let us know that we're approaching our guardrail. What are some of those red flags? What are some of those rumble strips that allow us to know we're getting close?
Well, I tell you what, the biggest one is just if you're not able to let your spouse know that something's happened. Mm-hmm. So say it's a text message. If you're not comfortable showing that to your spouse, it's probably not appropriate. If it's an email or a Facebook message and you would not let your spouse know about it, or you would say something like, oh, well, he could never know that I've had this kind of conversation.
Or if you find yourself deleting your Facebook messages or deleting your browsing history, that's probably a warning sign that you're getting close to a guardrail.
Or maybe that you need to make some stronger guardrails on the ones that you already have. Now, say you hit a guardrail, and this happens because none of us are perfect. We all make mistakes. Mm-hmm. So this happens. You hit a guardrail, what do? There needs to be some communication. And we talked a little bit about that, but how do we communicate? 2 ways, transparent and early. Mm-hmm. So you need to make sure that you're open, you're sharing all the details, you're not withholding any information just because it might hurt them. You're transparent, and it's as soon as possible. You're not waiting, you're not delaying, you're not making an excuse that, well, if I tell her now, she's already in a bad mood. No, you have to be as early as possible to prevent any further damage. All right, now here's the disclaimer. These guardrails that we shared with you are specific ones that Jess and I have chose for our marriage, for our circumstances, and our family. Your challenge is to come up with yours. So come up with 3 guardrails for you and your spouse that are specific to you. Now they could be the same as the ones that we shared with you, or they could be entirely different, depending on you, your circumstances, your priorities, your family.